nurse grabbed my arm so hard I nearly dropped my water cup. "Don't eat anything your daughter brings you tomorrow," she whispered, glancing over her shoulder toward the hallway. "Please, I need you to trust me right now." I stared at her. She was young, maybe 30, with tired eyes and a badge that said Colleen RN. I'd seen her twice before, once when she changed my IV line, once when she caught me trying to walk to the bathroom without the call bell. She wasn't my regular nurse, so why was she looking at me like that? "What are you talking about?" I said. She leaned closer. "Just don't eat it. I'll explain when I can." Then she was gone, disappearing around the curtain before I could say another word. I lay there in the dark of my room at St. Joseph's Health Center in Toronto, staring at the ceiling tiles. The heart monitor beeped. Someone in the hallway laughed at something. Outside, it was November, and I could hear sleet hitting the window in thin, scattered bursts. I was 64 years old, recently retired from 31 years teaching high school history in Etobicoke, and I was lying in a hospital because I'd had what my cardiologist called an episode. Chest tightness, shortness of breath, dizzy spells that had been getting worse for 6 weeks. They wanted to run more tests. They wanted to observe me for a few more days. They were concerned, they said, about some of the blood panel results. Unusual markers. I hadn't thought much about that word, unusual, until Colleen said what she said. Now I couldn't think about anything else. My wife, Bed, had passed 3 years earlier. Ovarian cancer, caught late. We had 40 years together, most of them good, some of them hard, the way long marriages get hard, all of them real. After she died, the house in Etobicoke felt like a museum. I rattled around in it for 2 years before I finally admitted to myself that I was lonely, in a way that couldn't be fixed by keeping busy. My daughter Miriam had moved to Oakville with her husband Lawrence about 8 years prior. Lawrence was in commercial real estate. He wore expensive watches and laughed loudly at his own jokes, and I had never in 8 years figured out quite what to make of him. Miriam seemed happy, or at least she seemed settled, which I'd come to understand are not always the same thing. They had 2 boys, my grandsons. Felix was 11, Theo was 8. Wonderful kids. That part, being their grandfather, that part was the best thing in my life after Bet died. Miriam had been attentive since my hospital admission. She came every evening after work, brought food from home because she said hospital food was terrible and she wanted to make sure I was eating properly. Soups, mostly. A chicken and rice she knew I liked. Containers she'd heated up and brought in a thermal bag. I had eaten every drop. It tasted exactly like hers always did. Or so I thought. The next morning, Colleen came in during the early shift, before Miriam would have been anywhere near the hospital. She checked my chart, adjusted something on the IV, and then, without looking at me directly, said quietly, "I need 5 minutes with you. Can I close the curtain?" "Close it," I said. She sat in a chair beside the bed. She folded her hands. She looked like someone who had practiced what she was about to say and was still not sure she had the words right. "Mr. Fenwick," she said, "what I'm about to tell you, I need you to stay calm. And I need you to understand that I've already spoken to hospital administration and they've been in contact with the police. This is not me acting alone." My mouth went dry. "Your blood work," she said. "We ran the panel 3 times because the results were strange. There are elevated levels of a compound. I'm not going to use the technical name, but it's a substance that accumulates slowly. It's not something that shows up from environmental exposure or normal diet. Someone would have to be introducing it to you deliberately, over time, in small amounts." I heard the words. I understood them individually, but they would not arrange themselves into a sentence that made sense. "You're saying someone is poisoning me?" "We believe so, yes." The sleet had stopped. Through the window I could see gray sky, the tops of bare trees, a parking garage in the distance. A normal Tuesday morning in Toronto. "How long?" I said. "Based on the levels, we think at least 4 to 6 weeks, possibly longer." 4 to 6 weeks. I'd been having dizzy spells for 6 weeks. The chest tightness had started around the same time. I'd assumed it was my heart, assumed it was age, assumed it was grief catching up with me the way people said it eventually did. "Who knows about this?" I asked. "Right now, Me, the attending physician, the chief of medicine, and 2 officers from Toronto Police who were here this morning while you were still asleep. We didn't want to wake you until we had a plan." "A plan," I repeated. "They want to set something up," she said. "They need to catch whoever is doing this, and for that—" She paused. "For that, they need your help." The detective's name was Branna, mid-40s, short hair going gray at the temples, a calm manner that I suspected had taken years to develop. She sat where Colleen had sat, and she laid it out plainly. "We need you to continue as normal," she said. "Act as though you don't know anything. When your daughter comes this evening, when she brings food, we need you to accept it. But you won't eat it. We'll swap it out. We have people who will be here." "You want me to act normal," I said, "with my daughter?" "Yes." "While believing that she's—" I couldn't finish. "I understand how difficult this is, Mr. Fenwick." I looked at my hands, big hands, a teacher's hands, always holding chalk or a book or some kid's shoulder trying to tell him that things would work out. My father's hands, Bet used to say. "Is it possible it's something else?" I said. "Some contamination, some." "We've looked at every other explanation," Branna said. "The compound isn't present in any of the hospital food. It's not in the water supply. It is consistent with something being added to food that was prepared externally and brought in. The thermal bag. The soups, the chicken and rice she knew I liked." "What about Lawrence?" I said. Branna looked at me steadily. "We're looking at both of them. I am not going to pretend I handled that day with any grace. After they left, I lay there for a long time and I cried, quietly, the way men my age cry when they've spent a lifetime believing they shouldn't. I cried for Bet because she would have known something was wrong before any blood test did. I cried for the boys, Felix and Theo, because none of this was their fault and all of this would land on them eventually. And I cried for the thing I was already losing, the version of my daughter I thought I knew. That version would not do this. So either I didn't know her at all, or someone else had put her up to it, or there was a mistake so enormous that I couldn't yet see around the edges of it. I held on to that last possibility like a man holds a railing in the dark. Miriam arrived at 6:30. She was wearing her work coat, a burgundy wool thing she'd had for years. Her hair was pulled back. She looked tired. She kissed my cheek. Her lips were cold from outside. "How are you feeling?" she said. "A little better," I said. It was the hardest 2 words I had ever spoken. She unpacked the thermal bag. "A container of soup, lentil," she said, "and a small loaf of sourdough from the bakery in Oakville she knew I liked." She arranged it on the tray table, found a spoon in the drawer, poured the soup into the container lid to let it cool. All of it completely normal. All of it something she had done a dozen times. I watched her hands. I watched her face. I looked for something, guilt, hesitation, some flicker of the thing Branna had described. I found nothing. She looked like my daughter. She sounded like my daughter. She told me that Felix had a hockey tournament in Burlington that weekend, and Theo had lost a tooth at school, and was furious that the tooth fairy only left him $5 because apparently some kid at school had gotten 10. I laughed. It came out sounding real somehow. Somewhere nearby. I didn't know where. I'd been told not to look. There were people watching. Miriam stayed for an hour. She hugged me before she left. A real hug, her arms around my shoulders and her head against mine for a moment. She smelled like cold air and the same shampoo she'd used since university. "I'll be back Thursday," she said. "Call me if you need anything." After she left, a hospital aide came in, swapped the soup container with a sealed evidence bag, and left without a word. I didn't sleep that night. On Thursday, Branna came back in the afternoon before Miriam was due. "We've had results from Tuesday's sample," she said. "The compound was present, significantly higher concentration than what's in your bloodstream. It was in the soup." The room tilted slightly, or maybe that was just me. "There's something else," Branna said, and the way she said it told me I needed to brace. "We obtained a warrant for financial records. Mr. Fenwick, your son-in-law has a significant debt problem. We're talking about a number that, it's substantial. He's been dealing with it for at least 2 years. "What kind of debt?" "Private lending, not through any bank. The kind of lenders who don't offer extensions." She paused. your estate, the house, your pension, the RRSP accounts, it would resolve the problem comfortably. I had a house in Etobicoke that I'd owned since 1989. I had a teacher's pension, a decent one. I had savings. By most measures, I was not a wealthy man, but by the measure of a man who owed money to people who didn't offer extensions, I was exactly wealthy enough. Does Miriam know about the debt? I asked. We don't know yet. That's one of the things we're still working to establish. I thought about that, about the difference between a daughter who knew and a daughter who didn't. What happens tonight? I said. Brianna told me. There were 2 officers in the building when Miriam arrived. One was posing as a patient in the room across the hall. One was at the nursing station. Colleen was on shift. Everyone knew the plan except me, it felt like. Or rather, everyone knew their part of it, and my part was simply to be the person I always was. Miriam came at 7. Same coat, different soup, butternut squash this time. She said it out the same way. Talking about nothing terrible, about Felix's tournament and a problem at her office and whether I'd spoken to my brother in Halifax recently. I had to stop her. Not for the plan. For myself. Miriam, I said. Something in my voice made her go still. Is there anything you want to tell me? She looked at me. A long look. Something moved behind her eyes. I don't know what it was. I have turned it over in my mind 1,000 times since. And then she said quietly, What do you mean, Dad? Is there anything going on with you and Lawrence that I should know about? She set down the spoon. She sat in the chair. She was quiet for a moment that felt very long. Why are you asking me that? Because I'm your father, I said, and I've known you for 37 years, and something is wrong. What happened next I did not expect. She started crying. Not the crying of someone caught. Something else, something that had been held for a long time and suddenly had nowhere left to go. He's in trouble, she said. Lawrence, there's money he owes and I don't know what to do. I don't know how bad it is. He won't tell me everything and I'm scared and I didn't want to put it on you while you're in here and She covered her mouth with her hand. I didn't know what to do, she said. I looked at my daughter, at her face. At the way she looked, exactly the way she looked at 9 years old, when something was too big for her. And I understood in that moment what I needed to know. She didn't know. She had no idea what was in the soup she was bringing me. She was married to a man who was desperate enough to use her love for me, her habit of feeding me, her access to this room, as a delivery mechanism. And he had not told her what she was carrying. I reached over and I pressed the call button on the bed rail. Miriam looked up. Dad? What's? Colleen appeared in the doorway within 30 seconds, and behind her, 2 people in civilian clothes who were not hospital staff. What followed was not something I will describe in detail because some of it I don't fully remember, and some of it I don't want to. Lawrence was arrested at their home in Oakville that same night. He had, it turned out, purchased the compound through an online source traceable only to him, not to Miriam, not to anyone else. The communications on his phone were unambiguous about his intent and about the fact that he had told Miriam nothing beyond that he was handling things. He had been handling things for 5 weeks. There are things that happen that rearrange the furniture of a life without asking permission. You wake up in a hospital room in November, and by spring you are living in a different world than the one you went to sleep in. Miriam moved back to Etobicoke with the boys in February. Not into my house. She rented a place 3 streets over, wanted her own space, which I understood. I see Felix and Theo most weekends. Felix has gotten very serious about hockey. Theo has developed an opinion about every pizza topping in existence, and will share it unprompted. The legal proceedings are ongoing. I won't say more than that. What I will say is this. My daughter sat in that hospital room and cried and did not know she was carrying poison to her father. And that fact, that specific fact, is the one I return to when the other thoughts come in at night. She did not know, and that made all the difference. I lost a son-in-law that November. I had already lost a wife. Some people would look at my life and see a list of subtractions. But Felix called me last Saturday to ask if I remembered anything about the War of 1812. Because he had a project due and his teacher was being very picky about primary sources. I talked to him for 45 minutes. I dug out an old textbook I still had on the shelf. He took notes. 31 years in a classroom, and somehow that conversation felt like the best teaching I've ever done. Bet would have laughed at me for saying that. She would have been right too. I think about Colleen sometimes, the nurse who grabbed my arm in the dark and told me not to eat the soup, who risked something she didn't have to risk for a patient she barely knew. I left a card for her at the nursing station after I was discharged. I don't know if she got it. I hope she did. Some people, strangers mostly, reach into your life and hold something steady when everything else is tilting. You don't always get the chance to thank them properly. But you don't forget them either. You carry them with you, the way you carry anyone who chose, for no particular reason except decency, to be there when it mattered. That's what I've learned at 64, after everything. Love doesn't work as leverage. The moment someone tries to use it that way, it stops being love entirely. And real love, the kind Bet had, the kind Colleen showed a stranger in a hospital bed, the kind Miriam showed when she cried not out of guilt but out of exhaustion and fear, that kind holds, even when everything else breaks. Even when everything else breaks. Even when the sleet is coming in sideways and the ceiling tiles need counting and you don't yet know whether the morning will bring an answer or another question. It holds. I've been sitting with this for months now, trying to figure out what it taught me. Not the dramatic parts. The arrest. The evidence bags. The detective laying it all out in that quiet hospital room. Those parts I could tell to anyone. What I keep coming back to is something smaller. It's the moment Miriam sat down in that chair and started crying. Not because she was caught, but because she was exhausted from carrying something she didn't fully understand. That image stays with me more than anything else. There's a version of this story where I become bitter. I think most people would understand if I had. When you find out that someone used your daughter's love for you as a weapon, used her cooking, her habit of care, her routine of showing up, you would be reasonable to close off. To decide that the world is a place where you keep your doors locked and your food untouched and your trust somewhere no one can reach it. I chose differently, not because I'm a particularly good man, mostly because Bet spent 40 years showing me what it actually looks like to hold on to your sense of yourself when things get hard. She didn't collapse when her diagnosis came. She got quieter, more deliberate. She paid attention to what mattered. I watched her do that, and I tried to learn from it. And that learning is the thing that got me through November. What I understand now is that decency is not passive. It doesn't just mean being kind when things are easy. Colleen could have looked at my blood work, flagged it, and let the system handle it in its own time. Instead, she came to my room in the dark and grabbed my arm and took the risk of being wrong because she thought it was more important to act than to be cautious. That took something, a clear sense of what was right and the courage to move toward it even when moving was uncomfortable. That's not a small thing. I want to be more like that. And Miriam, my daughter, who didn't know who was being used by a man she trusted, she had to find her own version of that same steadiness afterward. Walking away from a marriage, rebuilding a life, explaining things to two boys who loved their father and now had to make sense of something children shouldn't have to make sense of. She's been doing that with more clarity and more backbone than I would have managed at her age. I watch her and I think she's going to be okay. More than okay. Lawrence made his choices because he decided that cleverness was enough, that if he could arrange things carefully enough, the truth would never surface. He was wrong about that. The truth has a way of showing up in blood panels, in financial records, in the quiet observations of a nurse who noticed something that didn't add up and decided it was her business to care, trying to construct a life around what you can get away with, rather than what you can stand behind. It doesn't hold. It collapses under its own weight, and it takes down everyone you were supposed to protect. Felix called me last week to argue about hockey statistics. Theo has strong opinions about whether pineapple belongs anywhere near a pizza. I have a house that feels less like a museum than it used to. That's enough. That's more than enough.